You know, it's so easy to get lost in today's internet. For example, YouTube's algorithm is specifically designed to keep you on the site for as long as possible, personalizing content to be engaging for you. Honestly, I have no doubt that for some of you, you have something else that you should be doing, and this is just another in a long chain of distracting videos. And I mean, I get it. It's so easy to get into, and it's so hard to put down. I've been there so many times. One of our main problems nowadays is that we draw entertainment from the same devices that we do work on. And this makes it really easy to just, for example, switch tabs and get lost for a few seconds and then a few minutes, etc. And it just builds up. Or maybe you're just switching often but for like brief periods or something, but that's still problematic because then you're never really focused long enough to get in the zone. You're doing brief periods. It's like your mind's just not there. I'm sure there are many other scenarios. In any case, it's just too easy to switch out of doing work. So my main advice in this video is to make it as hard to switch to distractions as possible. You essentially just want to establish as strong a barrier as possible between work and non-work. By default, your barrier is just your mental self-control. But if you're seeking advice from this video, it's probably clear to you by now that just your self-control is not enough. So what else can you do? The main trick I use is a physical barrier. Now, this is my room at a different angle, and this is the previous graphic superimposed on my room. Essentially, the side with my left on the desk is treated as my work zone. And when I'm there, I try to force myself to stay off any potentially distracting sites or programs or things like that. And only if I unplug my setup and I move my laptop and phone over and stuff like that to the other side of the room, I guess my bed, can I switch to something else. And that's the main idea behind the trick. Obviously, this works better with bigger spaces and stuff like that, but it still works, and there's a key difference between doing something like this and normal self-control. Like with something like this, you're not completely stopping yourself from going off task like self-control would do. Because normally you have to work, there's no way around it. But with this, you're giving yourself the option to get off task, but only if you actually put some physical effort in to make it happen. Only if you physically leave the work zone and you go to the other side. And at least for me, this is a lot easier to enforce than just no off task whatsoever. Because it's easy to resist that, but the easier something is to enforce, the easier you'll be able to enforce it. So that's why I think this is effective. Or at least that's why it's effective for me. And there are other things you can do to strengthen this barrier you have as well. For one, you can use like a site or a program blocker, and you can enable it whenever you try to work, and you can combine that with the mental barrier of the physical location. A program to activate a site blocker only when you're in certain locations, like if you're in your work zone and suddenly like the site blocker will automatically activate and then it'll deactivate when you're out, or during certain times if you hold yourself to a schedule. Both of those would be very useful here if they exist. I'm sure the time thing does. And even better, some parental control like thing where another computer or another person has control. That's even better because then it's totally out of your hands. And otherwise, while a regular site blocker is still possible to disable manually, it still adds to the barrier, and it's still another thing you have to do to get around being distracted. So I think in any case, having at least some form of site blocker is useful. So as an example, just say you want like a few seconds to just check your messages somewhere, like Discord or something like that. I do that all the time. To do that, what will you have to do to break your barrier? You have to unplug your setup, maybe, if you plug things in. You have to move out of your work zone, disable your site blocker, and do whatever else, like the other blocks you have in place, you have to disable those as well. And are you really going to do all of that for just a few seconds of leisure? It essentially, it makes it more work. Like you spend more time getting past your own barrier than the time you would spend being off task in the first place. You might as well just not. And essentially, you're creating a strong aversion to taking some impromptu break because now you have to do all this stuff to accomplish that. And it's kind of like a lose-lose situation because either you're stuck doing work or you're stuck getting around this annoying barrier that you have set up. And it kind of sucks, but having to do a lot of work also sucks. And at least now with this, you aren't lying to yourself about it. Now, hopefully, you've made it pretty hard to cross from a working state to a non-working state. But how do you go the other way? Like, how do you get started on working when you've been in a non-working state for a while? And honestly, it can be pretty hard. Like, it can be really hard to just say, let's start working and do it, right? Like, if you could do that and you can actually stick with it, then that would solve all your problems. But It's hard to do that. So if you can't, what I recommend is just doing something else to break the flow of inactivity. Like, for example, you can do something, like you can go get food or something. You can go to the bathroom. You can go for a walk. Just something to force yourself to transition between whatever you're doing and actually starting to work. Because then, like, instead of having to, like, stop what you're doing and then immediately transition into work, which is hard and it's just very unappealing in general, instead you stop what you're doing and you do something else, and only then do you work. And so it sort of disrupts your flow. And then you can jump right back in a productive mood. But also, like, don't fall into the trap of waiting for something else to happen. Like, that's why I suggest going for a walk or leaving the room or something like that, because it's something you can make happen. But if you wait for something else to happen, then it's just too easy to put something off until the next something else, and then you'll just keep doing that and never actually get anything done. Along with that methodology and the general idea of using, like, the barrier, here are a few other more, like, general tips that I have that have been working for me as well. So first of all, if you're sleeping badly, for sure fix that. I've talked about sleep many times in my other videos. And, like, better sleep means being more awake, which means better cognition, and you'll be able to focus better, right? So it's just, like, good overall. And you should try to hold yourself to a sleep schedule. And if you can't, if you're sort of stuck in the cycle of bad focus, meaning you don't have time to do work, so you have to do work at night so you can't sleep, and then because you can't sleep you can't focus, that sort of cycle, which I totally understand as well. That's something I've suffered with in the past. At least try to fix the focus part so you do have time to sleep and you can break that cycle a little bit. You can at least do, in part, something to help with that. And if possible, try and hold yourself to, like, a working schedule or something, or a daily schedule as well. Just because it sort of makes it more organized and you can associate certain times with working. And you can also you should also allow for some breaks in between so you don't tire out so easily. Working for like 8 hours straight is generally not good, and it'll probably just tire you out. But again, try to hold yourself to a schedule. This could probably act as another part of the barrier, that you can't break it unless you're at a certain point in your schedule. Another thing in terms of time, like, don't get lost in the sunk cost fallacy, which I've thought about a lot myself. So maybe you've, like, wasted the last 2 hours or something, right? And, like, you're frustrated about it, which is reasonable. But that time is gone, and there's no point, like, dwelling on the past. So however much time you have left, you still have it. So just stick to the present, and with the time you have left, do what you still can. And I mean, don't be so hard on yourself. Like, sometimes you're just gonna have bad days. You wake up, you just feel tired, it's not gonna go well. I don't know how to get around that. I don't know if you can, but you can at least make the best out of the good days. And that's always something you can strive for. Okay, one final note. I have mentioned before this is what I use myself, and it helped me fix my own focus issues. I have been having pretty good success and spending a lot more of my time actually getting things done than before. But I do recognize that for, like, scientific purposes, I guess, self-experimentation is not the most trustworthy source. I've also tried to include the logic behind this approach, just identifying a problem and a solution to it that I think makes sense. So hopefully that'll suffice, at least, to convince you to initially try it, if you think it also makes sense. And if you do this over time, or you just do some sort of focus strategy over time, you'll get better at self-discipline. It'll become even easier to make yourself focus later on. So for everyone who's still watching at this point, please feel free to let me know how it goes if you do try it, and if it does work out, because I'm pretty interested in seeing how it'll do for other people. Yeah, this is an atypical video for my channel, I guess, but if this does do well enough, I will probably branch out and do some more stuff like this, just to keep it a bit interesting. And if you do want to show support for this type of content, I'm sure you know what buttons you should be smashing right now. I think a lot of other YouTubers have made references to that. Yeah, that's all. Goodbye.